Hello, it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's New England Association of Schools and Colleges Virtual Global Forum, Curriculum Through a Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Lens. We're grateful you're with us today. We're a global community of educators taking up timely and important topics for the age we live in, and most of all for the children we serve. Each and every day, as you know, they're the reason we exist and the reason the quality of their education matters so very much. They're our present and they're our future. And today's topic is one that can and does impact their lives in a great way. It's not an easy topic to talk about and may mean so many different things for our schools. We might think of it this way. Today's NEASC Forum is a first word from our member schools on the topic of DEI and curriculum, but it's certainly not the last word. We may agree or not agree with what we hear from our presenters today, but I'm sure there's something that all of us can learn, and learning is what we're all about here. It's great to see the chat so active this morning and the friends and connections that are being renewed around the world. I'm Dan Ferris, Director, Commission on Independent Schools at NEASC. My co-host today is Allison Gary, Director, Commission on Public Schools. Today, you will hear from representatives of several NEASC member schools. They've joined us to discuss the steps they have taken to review and redesign their curriculum with an eye to inclusion, equity, and diversity. And now, it's my pleasure to hand things over to Allison Gary, my co-host.
Thank you so much, Dan. We go into today's conversation understanding that equity work is a complex issue with many approaches, but our hope is to bring you some real-world insight and share experiences with a lot of good ideas and resources. We're very grateful to have a panel representing a spectrum of schools that will help us understand the issues from a variety of perspectives. We know that there are many questions out there on your mind about this topic, and we'll answer as many as we can today, but you know that we only have an hour. So please be assured that we will return to this topic and add additional resources as well as future forums. So I'd like to start by having our panelists introduce themselves. Why don't we start with Julianne and Jessica, and then we'll go to Eddie and Dom.
Hi, I'm Julianne Levin, and I'm the Director of Curriculum and Grants for East Hampton Public Schools in East Hampton, Massachusetts. We're over here in Western Massachusetts, and we have about 1,500 students in our district.
Hi, good morning. I'm Jessica Delaquilla. I am a history teacher at the Jeremiah E. Burke High School in Dorchester, Massachusetts. It is part of the Boston Public Schools. BPS serves around 50,000 students, and the Burke serves around 400 of those.
Hi, I'm Dominic Dalle. I am at ACS Egham International School, which is part of a group of ACS schools. We also have two other campuses in the UK, one in Doha. I am the head of PE, the Diversity, Equity and Inclusion lead, and we have been doing quite a lot of work on DI in the last year and a half.
Wonderful. Eddie?
Good morning, folks from around the globe. My name is Eddie Carson. I am the Dean of Multicultural Education here at the Governor's Academy. I'm a 20th century historian of American race and religion. I also teach seminar courses in the history department. Moreover, we're a school that is demographically diverse, so we'd like for it to be even more diverse. We draw students from a range of places internationally, particularly that of Asia. We have a large concentration in New England, and we have students from the South, especially the Atlanta area, and as far west as Seattle and San Francisco. We have approximately about 410, 415 students, diverse student body within that 410, 415 students. We are right now the oldest boarding school in the country out here in Eastern Mass, just about 30 miles north of Boston.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Eddie, I'm going to go back to you and have you answer our first question. So we'd like you to talk a little bit about where your school or organization is in this work and why it's a priority.
Thank you, Allison. Yeah, so I'll go ahead and get started here by saying that the Governor's Academy has been quite committed to DEI for a number of years, particularly since our head of school, Peter Quimby, became the head. And one of the things that we're currently looking to do right now in our work is we are evaluating our curriculum, not only just in a classroom in terms of what is taught, what courses are delivered, but the ways in which we deliver that information too. We've come to the conclusion that just by offering certain courses, which I'll delve into a little bit later during this conversation, it's just only one aspect, but yet we need to take a look globally, collectively, across the institution in terms of the assessments that are needed. So one of the things that we're doing right now, of course, is we've hired a consultant firm that's going to work with my office and come in and do a critical cultural assessment. They're going to do things from small group conversations with different constituents, such as families, to my colleagues, students, to draw some type of conclusion about where we are demographically, to mapping out a roadmap in terms of what are the roadblocks in front of us when it comes to delivering an instruction. And the last thing I'll say briefly is the fact that we're committed to really instituting a culturally responsive curriculum, especially when it comes to culturally responsive pedagogy. And so what I mean by that is the fact that we are taking an approach that this is not just a humanities issue and things seem to fall on the departments of history and English, but we're taking an approach that we want all of our teachers within our classes, be it math, science, fine arts, for example, language, to really examine how are they delivering instruction that focus on the lived experiences of their students in the classroom. Even if they're teaching a class that's not wholly diverse and there's an absence of people that's there, bringing those voices into the classroom really enlivens it, enriches the conversation more. We're really deeply committed to the academic achievement of our students. And one of the ways that we're doing that, of course, is by using data to quantitatively measure what we're doing when it comes to DEI. Currently, I'm creating a data dashboard, and that data dashboard is going to allow us to know what students are enrolled in what courses as a way to promote equity and inclusion across the board. We're looking to examine, the GPAs of students. We want to know, for example, our female students, or those who identify as female, do they seem to achieve better in the language, in the humanities courses, more so in the math courses, those traditional tropes? What students are winning the prizes at the end of the year, and why are certain demographics of students winning prizes, and what students are left behind? One of the things that we've struggled with, of course, is not having that visual understanding of what does it mean and what does it look like to know where our students are. Because in order for us to surgically delve into integrating certain levels of curriculum, we got to know what populations are excluded from the study. And without the raw data and the raw numbers that are necessary, then our work moving forward becomes somewhat of guesswork, and guesswork is problematic. And we're moving away from guesswork, and we're going to measure everything that we do quantitatively.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Jessica, let's go to you.
Hi again. So about 11 years ago, the Burke High School was designated by the state of Massachusetts as a failing school. So that's really when this work began at the Burke. So a lot of measures were taken in order to improve our school. A lot of the work that we did was around, and that we continue to do, was around redesigning curriculum to ensure that it was reflecting the identities of our students. 60% of the Burke students are Black and 32% are Hispanic. So it was really important that the curriculum was reflecting our students' identities and was culturally relevant. Other things that the school has worked on and continues to work on is training teachers in trauma-sensitive practices, as well as replacing discipline policies with restorative problem solving. And I'm happy to go into some of the specifics around how we have kind of really dove into our curriculum to make sure that it's culturally responsive.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Dom, and then we'll have Julianne.
So over the last year and a half, we have developed a charter and a vision, which we didn't have before. And we examined quite a few other international schools across the world, connected with them and found out what they were doing in their context. And what we realized that each school and every school has its own context and makeup of faculty and staff. And that's really important for to consider. And that's what we found, especially. My school in Egham is quite different from our sister schools. And so looking across the schools was really important and extremely important to include everybody in the process. That's parents, students, leadership, and even at the board level. From there, we created 4 pillars. One was looking at procedures and policies. One was looking at the community. One was also looking at teaching and learning, and one was looking at recruitment. And so if I focus a little bit on the teaching and learning, because that's one of the pillars that I'd like to discuss a bit more here, we are currently doing a curriculum review across the 4 schools. But again, each school is going to be probably operating from a different lens, depending on the makeup of the school, and adopting a slightly different framework as well on how to look at their curriculum. So some of the focuses could be looking at the particular units and subject areas, could also be looking at advisory sessions and how we raise awareness, advocate for student voice within the curriculum, find opportunities for them to review particular practices and units. And also, once we get that, we can delve a little bit deeper into the context of particular subjects. So, yeah, I'll talk a little bit more about those specifics later on.
Wonderful. Thank you. Julianne?
Hi. So we are, East Hampton is in its 5th year of focusing on diversity, equity, and inclusion, following sort of as a reaction to an incident that happened in our district. And one of the pieces that we took from that incident was that some students in the schools were really lacking a sense of belonging in the curriculum, in the hallways, seeing themselves in the staff represented in the staff members. So we dove into all pieces, everywhere from discipline to placement in special programs. But we are now really focusing in on curriculum. We started using the culturally responsive curriculum scorecards from NYU, the Steinhardt Education, Justice Research, and Organizing Collaborative. And so that's what we're using right now. Our framework, we read Cultivating Genius by Goldie Muhammad. It's a genius book. I know it's called Cultivating Genius, but it really is genius. Highly recommended. And it gives a framework for actually looking at historical literacy and portraying it accurately for students. We are a mostly white district, and so this is work that white people are really trying to do with white people, getting other white people on board, and especially in a rural place. That's it's taken 5 years to get where we are, but it does feel like we're on board, and everyone's sort of moving in the same direction now, which feels really good. We also have a social justice education PLC for our elementary schools, and that's a teacher-run group that develops teaching tools monthly, so that when teachers are feeling like they need to celebrate holidays or important events that have happened in history, that they already have a resource to do it accurately and truthfully. So we're doing a lot of that work right now.
Thank you. So many questions, and we're getting some questions in the Q&A as well. Eddie, can I ask you just to define culturally responsive pedagogy? Can you just define that for our listeners so that everybody's sort of on the same page with that?
Absolutely. So when we think about culturally responsive pedagogy, most people don't realize, with all the criticism around critical race theory, that culturally responsive pedagogy actually comes out of that. And one of the things that it does is it really focuses on the fact that if you have students within your community, their lived experiences should be pushed to the forefront and should be centered around them, particularly making what you teach relevant in the lives to the students within your population. Not only relevant in the sense that that you're talking about students of color or marginalized students per se, but the fact that even if you're at a predominantly white institution, they need to have access to it too. So again, I would say in a nutshell, when we think about culturally responsive pedagogy, key things would be, a relevant curriculum that reflects the images and concerns students have. It teaches this element to promote critical questioning, and it is also committed to social justice work. Student academic achievement and engagement increases when they are taught in a culturally relevant framework and manner like that. So for example, really evaluating ethnic and racial histories is absolutely important. And, and so one of the things that we've worked to do in our curriculum, and again, I do want to say, just because you offer a course, that's just not enough. It takes a much greater capacity to do that. But when I think about culturally responsive pedagogy, we offer courses, for example, in American Studies. A lot of schools do that, where we merge both English and history together in one course. So, for example, in the junior year, our students can take American Studies. And as they take American Studies, they get a real big holistic integration of different types of demographics that come together too. Our English department's done a great job trying to really work some courses in. We have Native American literature, and that's through storytelling and experience of indigenous peoples and how that has impacted us collectively as society. A course that I find fascinating that we offer is a course on contemporary drama and race, and really looking at the past and looking at past literature in the ways in which race comes out in the literature. And I'm talking about things that folks don't think about, such as I have a colleague who teaches, here's a traditional canon book. Let's talk about Shakespeare, Macbeth. But in the delivery and teaching Macbeth, they focus a lot on gender and sexual orientation through that experience. We offer a course on Asian American literature. This term, I'm co-teaching a course with a colleague of mine in the science department on climate justice. He focused more on the science aspect. I delve deeply into issues and matters dealing with environmental racism. I have students who've never heard the term redlining before. They entered this class. And next semester, I'll teach a seminar course on race, class, and gender. That's there.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Jessica, I'm going to go to you because I've been to your school and I know that this is work that you have been doing to ensure that your curriculum is responsive to students. Can you talk about that just a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. So what we've done as the history department, and what I think is important for schools that are just starting this work, is not trying to do all of the things at one time. So really starting with let's start with this one unit, and where in this unit can we be more culturally responsive? And so questions that I ask myself when I'm looking at a unit is, where might white supremacy be showing up in this in these lessons, and how can I dismantle that? And then also, where do I have opportunities to incorporate more texts that are written by Black and Brown authors and authors that come from the same cultural backgrounds as my students? And then the third question I would ask myself when I'm looking at a unit and trying to make it more culturally responsive is, why is this important for students? How does this matter for students? So I'm always asking myself, why does this matter for my students' lives? And then if the answer is it doesn't, then there's some work that needs to be done. So a concrete example that I can give is I have a unit at the beginning of my American government curriculum that is about social contract theory. Social contract theory comes from white Western philosophers. And so I really needed to do some research around why do political philosophers really only look at these white men's thinking, and where is there, maybe not explicitly but implicitly, messages about race in this information? And so what I was able to discover in thinking about those things is that there are Black philosophers, and that there is a response to social contract theory that incorporates race into that. So what I had my students do this year was they did read an excerpt from Thomas Hobbes, but then they paired that with the thinking of a philosopher named Charles Mills, who is a Black philosopher that introduced the theory of the racial contract. And so we were able to layer those texts and by doing so, make the content more relevant to Black students. Because if you're a Black student, like, why do you care what this old white guy said in the 1500s? And so that definitely made it more interesting, made it more relevant. And we were able to kind of start thinking about this idea of the racial contract as it relates to our country's founding documents. And we were able to bring in other Black authors, like we read a Frederick Douglass speech and kind of compared that to the Declaration of Independence. So it's work that starts with the teacher and the educators doing some research. Like, you really have to research what you are teaching, and then asking yourself, how do I make this more relevant to students? Some other things that the history department has done to inform our curriculum changes is surveying students, asking students, what are you interested in? What do you want to learn about? And then finding ways to connect that with the curriculum frameworks that exist in Massachusetts.
That's great. And I think it's really important. And that question has come up. It was a question from people ahead of the webinar. How do we use student voice? How do we get student voice involved in this process? And I think that was a great thought. Eddie, did you have a follow-up to that?
I wanted to address a point that was put in a comment briefly, if that's okay. And I thought it was a great question dealing with DEI and mathematics. And, and that's always, for a lot of places, that's always been a challenge. Hence, one of the reasons why things seem to fall into the humanities. I put together a group of colleagues from different departments, from what I call the humanities division and a math and science division. And to speak directly and specifically to the math aspect, I wanted to point out that we've been talking about how do we engage with our math colleagues in different ways to address mathematics. And that's going to require more professional development. So for example, instead of courses just being about X's, looking for X or looking for Y or doing those different things, assigning names to X, for example, really looking at certain demographic and populations and using case studies or using math to examine case studies, especially dealing with some of the realities of students of color. This has been really successful in our statistics course, which is much easier than, say, maybe algebra or pre-calculus. One of the conversations we're having here, though, is the fact that within mathematics and thinking about DEI, is that sometimes students have, especially students of color, they have a hard time seeing themselves in that course because it doesn't seem pragmatic nor relevant. And part of our drive in thinking about cultural responsive pedagogy is to make mathematics relevant by putting them in front of the classroom, this topic. How do we teach algebra with human beings in mind? How do we do geometry? How do we think about spaces in different communities where space is a reality, where numbers do matter? So those are the conversations that we're having in the math department right now.
Dom, you talked about sort of 4 different pillars. And I think, there's a question in the Q&A that talks about how do we get our colleagues on board with sort of looking at this work and supporting this work. So I wondered if you could talk about that from sort of a big picture perspective within the system. How did you get folks on board to support those 4 pillars that you have?
Yeah, one of the big things that we're trying to do is engage everybody. It's really important for staff. And when I say staff, I mean not just teachers, everybody involved in the organization, to look at their own identity, think about why they want to get involved in the work, because it is so broad. And that's something which a lot of people are finding. And so it's not just about race. When we delve into DEI, we're looking at the intersectionality of so many different identities. That's really important, and that can really draw more and more people in and understand the intersectionality across. So one of the things that we have instigated is tell me your story, and we have asked staff to record a video of themselves where they are talking about their own identity in whichever way they want to. And we're collating that information, and that will then go out to staff and students and so forth. And eventually we're going to try and do a very similar thing with students as well, so that their stories can be heard, because often we'll find in this work that people are scared to speak up. They're scared in the classroom as well to address particular issues, and they're unsure of what to say. So it's all good and well having people come in and do presentations and workshops, and sometimes that can be quite performative, and a little tick box, and then we move on. It's got to be sustainable, and it's about that continuous engagement with staff, setting up a series of events and workshops which all tie together. And so something which we've been trying to do at our schools is linking particular workshops. So we're starting a series of workshops next week on anti-racism, which will then link to one on LGBTQ IA plus and so on. And so these become catalysts for change, and they continue. And that's the idea. Otherwise, they get left behind. And so you continue to sort of do this. And maybe later on, I'll talk a little bit about how our students have really actively involved themselves in the work that we're doing across our campuses, and some of the work that they're doing with other organizations as well.
Eddie, I'll get to you in just 1 minute. I just want to ask Dom, one of the questions that also came in before the webinar was, do you advise some self-work as a starting point? And so it sounds like that's exactly what you're saying, is that people need to sort of look within themselves, or faculty do their own work, at least some reflection prior to beginning this work. Would you agree, or do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, everybody's at their own stage in their learning, and some people have been doing this for many, many years. Personally, I haven't. I was, from my own perspective, I was very scared. And whenever I brought this up in my career, which has been in many different countries, there was a lot of pushback. But I think because more recently, in the last year and a half, there's been a lot more support and awareness from a lot of leaders in schools. They want to try and do something. This is a time to try to do this yourself, but you have to do this. So everybody out there listening, it's really up to you to try and step up and look for things. And it's not for those who are leading this to provide things for you all the time. There is so much out there. There are a lot of free resources like this webinar right now that you can delve into yourself. And you need to sort of realize why you're doing this in the first place and step up. But like it was mentioned earlier, there is so much. So, take it a step at a time and find something that you can really delve into. And then eventually you'll start looking across all the different areas that your school might sort of endeavor into.
Wonderful. Eddie, quick comment, and then I'm going to go to Julianne.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of follow up with what Dom stated. I'm going to put a link here in the chat box here in a second. And one of the things that in terms of resources that I developed for my colleagues here at the Governor's Academy is what I call the DEI syllabus. And in this DEI syllabus, there are articles, there are videos. I've categorized them in different ways for them to do their own self-education. But also one thing that I've done to really force the sense of community around DEI and how do we talk to each other and learn from each other, I created what's called the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Seminar. I did one last night on critical race theory. I have colleagues who do a lot of different ones. And the goal of this is the fact that all of our colleagues on campus, they bring something to the table that's relevant when it comes to DEI. And when folks say, well, Eddie, I'm not an expert, I don't know anything, that's not true. You know, even if you wanted to do one where you're telling your story that can be helpful when it comes to the classroom, that's beneficial. And so, you know, we're doing those on Zoom. My colleagues do about an hour seminar where they do a presentation and there's a conversation that's there. And again, this is what I call a Gov's community professional development opportunity to try to promote engagement and information when it comes to professional development that's relevant. So I'm going to go ahead and put the document in the chat for folks to take a look at too.
Awesome, thank you. All right, Julianne, I want to get back to you. And I know there's a lot of things you could talk about, but I want to ask you about pushback from parents. And you're in a predominantly white community. So we have several questions about, a parent wrongly objects, you're teaching critical race theory. How do you respond? Or sort of pushback, what strategies could you use in a conservative parent-student body and not a diverse demographic? So could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I will admit that I've had some wins in those conversations and I've had some really embarrassing losses. So I will say there's no formula that works all the time. What we try to do is instead of answering, whether we're teaching X, Y, or Z, we want to talk to parents about what we are teaching. And what we are teaching is a curriculum that hopefully students can find themselves in, that promotes their sense of belonging in our community. We try to talk a lot about social emotional skill building between students and how important that is for the future of our community. So it's less about saying, no, we don't do this, or we're going to respond directly to the concern. And it's more about promoting the positivity and the importance of what we're doing. That, again, doesn't always work. Certainly have had parents who, want to move out of the state because often, I resort to, this is in our standards. And I know, Massachusetts has some pretty progressive standards, but it's there, it's on the website, and I can print out resources from our Department of Education at any moment for any parent that says, this is what we're doing, and we're supported as a public school by our state. So that kind of takes the wind out of their sails most of the time when it's not a personal choice. It would be a personal choice, and I try to make that clear for parents. But it's not a personal choice. This is me doing my job. And so that feels like a good place to be. But I do also try to make sure that they understand that even if it weren't something that the state was requiring us to do, we'd be doing it anyway because it's our community. We are largely white, but we are seeing more and more diversity move into our community. And, we have as much of an obligation to help those families feel like they belong here as we do the families that have been here for generations and generations. So I think, I can chat around what my obligations are as a professional and also what my personal belief structures are. And I think, giving parents a chance to talk and let me hear what their concerns are. I often find that their concerns have nothing to do with what we are doing, that the fear that their concern is based in is not what's actually happening in the classroom. That comes up a lot for us around using, the process at the beginning of the year where we introduce ourselves and we identify our backgrounds, we identify our pronouns, and some parents have felt like, well, that's sort of indoctrination, right? That's what we're doing. And I'm like, well, it's not. We're just introducing ourselves. We're just getting to know each other as individuals, because that's how we build empathy. And that's, I definitely haven't won every one of those conversations, but it feels like it's no longer just me saying it. Anyone in the district can have that conversation with a parent. And it's going to be largely the same conversation because we've done the reading and done the PD together. So we're speaking with a common vocabulary around what we're doing and why we're doing it.
Yeah, and I think that idea of PD is so important, right? Professional development that you're doing with your staff so that everybody sort of has, as you said, the language and the context to be able to have those conversations. Any other thoughts on that topic in terms of working with parents or pushback from community? I think that our viewers would probably really appreciate that. It looks like there's some thoughts in the chat as well. Dom, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think it's really important to engage all stakeholders in your discussions. Like I said, we've developed the vision and charter, and parents and students have been involved. And sometimes marginalized staff, which could be non-teaching staff, really need to have engagement there as well. But with parents, for example, we formed parent DEI groups within and across our schools, and some parents may not like the work that is being done, but there needs to be an opportunity for them to have that discussion and an opportunity for them to ask those questions and have those conversations. And you may have parent-teacher organizations. It's about reaching out to them and drawing out those who will stand up and those who will find the opportunities and energy to sort of drive that. We, for example, our parent community as an organization where we have a president who will meet quite regularly with the head of school and discuss some of these issues. And again, they will be heavily involved in our DEI council. So that is the best way I've seen how not just my school, but other international schools have reached out. And again, it's really important to think about the context of your school and the makeup of your parent community as to how you're going to reach out and who you're going to reach out to.
Terrific. All right. I want to go back to Jessica and just ask you, what are some specific frameworks, tools, or resources that you've used to audit or assess your curriculum? And if a school is just beginning or a teacher is just beginning, where could they start?
So we, about 2 years ago, the district started using the culturally responsive instruction observation protocol, or CRIOP for short. It is an observation protocol that can be used in classroom observations or to look at curriculum. It was created by the University of Kentucky. It has 5 pillars that should be a part of every classroom, every lesson, every unit. So that's definitely a really great starting point. Some specific resources that our teachers have used and that we've used as like in departments and as a full school would be Facing History and Ourselves. Is a history organization that has a lot of really great lessons and just information. Learning for Justice, which was formerly called Teaching Tolerance, is another like amazing resource that has like just a ton of resources, information, professional development, training manuals for doing this kind of work and starting at the classroom level. I know I've definitely used Learning for Justice's, like they literally have manuals for leading conversations about race or about gender or about sexuality in your class that you can follow. Zin Education is also a really great resource. The Choices program from Brown University. We also use resources from the Southern Poverty Law Center. And then what our district has done, and this was in with our teachers union is they created a Black Lives Matter in Schools curriculum. So there are resources that are available to any teacher in the district and outside of the district. If you just look up the BPS or BTU Black Lives Matter in Schools curriculum, and there are from K to 12 just lessons, units for all of the content areas that incorporate racial justice in some way. So those are definitely some resources that we've used. For me personally, as a teacher, I think it's really important that, particularly if you're a white educator starting this work, you really need to be looking to the Black experts. And Black scholars have been doing this work for a really long time. It's not new. So some books that I've read are books by Zaretta Hammond, Bettina Love's book, Gloria Ladson Billings, Goldie Muhammad's book. Just like Julian said, it's an amazing book. And seeing like what are the Black and Brown experts in anti-racist teaching and culturally responsive pedagogy saying that we as individual educators need to do in our curriculum, in our classroom management. And starting there, I think like starting by educating yourself is the first step if you're just a teacher that's starting this work. And I've definitely heard from other people, particularly white people, a concern around, I don't want to say the wrong thing. And for me personally, the best remedy for that has been like really, really educating myself. And I don't just mean like reading one book and then moving on. I've read a ton of books about culturally responsive teaching, gone to professional developments in the summer, gone to like free webinars just like this, talk to my colleagues, and really just investing myself in like making this like a common practice, not just like, it's not a one and done thing. It's something that I'm continually doing. And that's where I would start if I was a teacher, kind of like starting this work on my own.
That's wonderful. And you just gave a million resources. And so many of them we've gotten in the chat, but we'll cull those resources out of the chat and we'll put them on our forum page underneath the recording of this forum. And so please know that all of those will be there if you didn't catch them all, because I know they're going quickly in the chat. So many great thoughts. Anybody else have other resources they would like to share or frameworks that they've used as they've evaluated their curriculum?
I would just add the specific standards from Learning for Justice are fantastic. And I know I really appreciate standards because I'm a curriculum director, but it makes it very clear for teachers who are used to standards-based curriculum to have a set of outcomes for students. It's really friendly language. It's so easy to weave those into your curriculum planning. So I would just huge shout out for the Learning for Justice equity standards.
Wonderful. Eddie, is there any pushback of people that say, well, I already have so much content to cover in my classes. How do I add this in? Or is it an either or is it something that you can sort of put together?
Oh, my friend, you must have read my mind. I think that's something that I hear quite frequently when I'm engaged with my colleagues. You know, my colleagues, they're brilliant. They're very good at their job. They are very content specific folks. And oftentimes too, they're driven by the things they've learned, which means they've excluded other folks from narratives that need to be there. And so one of the things that I encourage people, my colleagues, to do in their classes, and this is particularly true in the humanities, and I'll say something about math and science, is to, as you're going through your work, one of the things I do is I ask them to ask, you know, when you're teaching this, bring up the point of who is absent from the conversation is always a starting point. And lead a conversation. If you're talking about this, right? Oftentimes people get stuck on American Revolution. Well, what were Black people doing during the American Revolution? You know, in literature, for example, you know, there's been a lot of pushback not pushback, I want to say that, but a lot of conversations about how do we make space for other works, right? We need to have works by queer folks, works by Latinx folks, works by women, Black and brown folks, and there's just only so much choices. But our conversation is, even if you're reading a work by white folks, to teach students to contextualize the framework of who is absent, who is invisible from that conversation, and what were they doing during that time of what's happening, what's in place. And those have been part of the conversations I say. I will say our Asian American students have been just absolutely active in pushing us to be better, whether it's hiring, our curriculum, all of the programming, all of those things that's there. And one of the things that we've talked about in multiple departments, of course, is how do we have conversations about who's absent, because we can't keep adding courses. And that's really the starting point for our conversation. And I think that's the best starting point for any conversation, is to take a second into, when you're having these conversations, to ask students, who is missing from this? Why are they not present? That drives such a rich conversation that is just simply profound. And so for me, that's always a starting point with my colleagues. Why are folks absent from this literature? Why are they not in the space? Why are they not in the room?
Wonderful. Thank you. Julianne, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm going back to thinking about Dr. Bishop's work around windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors. Like, you need to have a balance. And I think that if you haven't seen her speak on what the importance there is, it's a worthwhile little YouTube clip to show your colleagues. But I think the idea that we can take things away. Like, there are things that we can take away from the curriculum that we currently deliver. And I certainly don't want teachers to feel like they have to do more. But I would like, and I am a huge fan of slashing curriculums down to what we find really important, and then putting it through the test of, are there the windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors that we need for our population? So that's a nice test, I think, whenever you're looking at curriculum, is you don't need too much of any one of the three. You need all three, and it needs to be balanced.
Awesome. If you can find that YouTube clip.
I was just looking for it. I will put it in the chat when I find it.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Jessica.
I wanted to add, along those lines, other pushback from educators that I've heard of around culturally responsive pedagogy is that it's not rigorous. But for me personally, I have found that, like, layering texts from authors that reflect the identities of my students, like alongside of like the traditional ones that you would read, if you want to keep those, that makes it more rigorous. Comparing to complex texts does make a lesson more rigorous. And I think that it is kind of our white supremacy talking when we think like, well, I have to teach the classics. Like, there are Black and brown authors and philosophers and historians and scientists that have been doing the same work that need to be recognized. Like the example that I brought up earlier, when my students read Thomas Hobbes and Frederick Douglass, like, same level of complexity, super rigorous. So we don't want to make the wrongful assumption that by bringing in other perspectives and voices, that means that we're somehow dumbing down curriculum. You're not. And you'll get students to buy into the curriculum more so that they can take their understanding to the next level. So it's you can have very rigorous, culturally responsive units and learning happening.
Yeah. And what I want to say, for NEASC perspective, I know in the Commission on Public Schools, we talk a lot about the vision of the graduate, which talks about transferable skills and dispositions. And I think it's important to realize that students can practice those skills and dispositions using any type of content, right? The content is not content is the vehicle to help them to learn those skills and the things that they need: collaboration, communication, critical thinking, problem solving. And those can be, developed using any type of content. So, when we talk about, what we're focusing on, it doesn't have to just be the classics or the things that have always been taught. I want to also lift up a comment in the chat from Colleen Morrell. She said, I also think it's important to demystify anti-racist teaching by focusing on instructional practices and pedagogies that promote equity, inclusion, and belonging for all of our learners. So things like the way we structure group work, how we intentionally scaffold development of student academic conversations, how we leverage universal design. And I think that's really important, right? Because it's not just the curriculum, it's also the instructional practices. And some of that is coming from the data that Julianne and Eddie talked about in terms of looking at which students are in which classes, what students have opportunities to take, different types of courses, as well as, different opportunities within the school. So I think that that's a really important point. All right, well, we only have just a few minutes left. I thought we could just end by focusing on the student perspective. So how do we get students involved in this work? What have you done so far? What would you suggest in terms of getting student perspective and student voices? So Eddie, why don't we start with you, and then we'll go through everyone.
We have what's called our community facilitators, and they meet weekly. As a residential school, we have the advantage, of course, of students being able to meet from 6 to 7 o'clock. And what they do is when they meet weekly, this is a selective group of students that take a deep dive into a topic. Maybe it's around gender, sexual orientation, race, ableism, whatever the diverse elements may be. And in their conversation, what they're going to do is they hold community conversations where they invite everyone to come talk about differences. Recently we had a conversation around our story, and we had students share their narrative from a perspective of being Asian, but being Asian, but yet being adopted by white parents, and what that felt like and what they meant. What does it mean to be at an institution like the Governor's Academy from a socio-economic standpoint? What does it mean to be a student at Govs, where students say they wear Gov stuff when they go for a run off campus as a Black student because they're worried that they may get harassed by the cops, for example. So these are the conversations they do. But in our work of intentionality, one of the challenges we face is that there's a population of students who never attend those things. Oftentimes it's white male students who are just not engaged. So our students who see themselves only as athletes, and identity issues are not relevant. So what we've done, again, we can do this as a residential school, so I want to note that, is we started holding dorm conversations around this. If they're not going to come to us, we're going to go to them, and we're going to really force and engage this conversation in different ways and invite folks into the space. And so my advice to folks is, while you can hold these conversations, oftentimes there's always a population that comes, and there's always a population that never shows up. We've also tried to scaffold this in terms of during our dining hall time at lunch, and really putting folks into spaces to really engage and talk to each other too. There are lots of criticism to all of this. It could feel forced, but yet we believe that manifestation is necessary and needed.
Wonderful. Thank you. Jessica, and then Dom.
I would definitely, for teachers, suggest surveys. Don't underestimate the power of surveys and asking kids what they think of what they're learning. And I love getting feedback from students on units, activities, lessons, especially if I'm trying something new or that maybe I'm not 100% confident or comfortable with. For example, last year during the pandemic, in response to the Capitol riot, I had for the first time, I had a Frarian culture circle with my students, and it was virtual. I had never done it before. I was unsure about it. And so I asked kids at the end of the activity, what did you think of this? What changes would you make? Try to make surveys anonymous sometimes, because kids will be more honest if they know that their name's not going to be associated with it. Other things that my school does frequently is hold equity roundtables. So inviting students, teachers, parents, administrators into one room, ensuring that there is equity of voices shared, and just conveying to students that they have a seat at the table, and that we want them to be excited about what they're learning. And so that starts with finding out from them what they're interested in, and always trying to find ways to incorporate that into the curriculum.
Wonderful. And I just have to mention, obviously, it takes a bit of vulnerability for you as a teacher to be able to ask for that feedback. And so I just want to, acknowledge that that's also a part of this work. Thank you, Dom.
Yeah, we need to empower students, and we need to elevate their voices. One of the things we do is we have our student council bodies, and within our student council body, in my particular school, we have a DI committee and a lead as well. And the students need to be empowered to run sessions such as advisory sessions, review units, review policies as well. And when they're leading these sessions, it's not just for students, but it's for teachers as well to listen and engage. And that's the most powerful thing. One of the things that we've been invited to is another organization, ECIS, of doing a leadership conference, and students are going to be invited to that conference to talk about the work they've been doing. And so if leaders can listen to students and understand their perspective, that can be more powerful. The student voice is powerful, and we need to give them that space. And so we're trying to look at lots of different ways to do that. I think one of you mentioned about giving sort of listening circles and things like that. Teachers need to not be scared to allow that to happen, because I think often we find in schools, students are going to sort of say something that's going to be a bit scary and risky, but no, they are intelligent. They are our future, and that is who we need to be listening to. Because that's why we're educators, surely. If my job as an educator is to elevate students' understanding and perspectives much further than mine, so that we all become better. So let's do this.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And Julianne, last word.
I couldn't agree more with everything Dom just said. A lot of the same practices we use. One thing I would add is that we started to do storytelling circles using resonance practice, and that was really important to empowering students and hearing their voices. So I'm a huge fan of resonance practice as one of the tools for creating an equitable space for people to share their voices.
Thank you so much. And I think in many cases, the students will push us, right? The students, as we get them involved and excited, they will help to push the conversation within the school and with their teachers. So thank you so much. All right, we're going to go ahead and wrap up for today. So I'm going to turn it back over to Dan, who will end the webinar for us.
And thank you to each of our panelists. Great conversation, thoughtful, informative. It's been a pleasure having each of you with us today. And we want to thank our participants in the broader NEASC Global Educators community. I trust you found at least one insight, one idea that'll be beneficial to you, your school, your students. I'm Dan Ferris, and thank you for being with us, and we'll see you at the next forum in 2022.
Thank you, people.